Okay, I want to read out of my book. I was going to make a video about current events, but then I thought, what would hit home more? Probably a war story about turning the tide of war. When things are looking bad for you, these are 50 battles that changed the course of modern history. Okay, Gettysburg is what, this is pretty short, so just hang in there with me. Gettysburg, 1863. The Confederate cause in the American Civil War was never better led than by General Robert E. Lee. But at Gettysburg, he misjudged his enemy and suffered a crucial defeat. His determination to break the center of the Union line of defense culminated in a brave but doomed frontal assault. From this point onwards, the Confederacy was on the defensive. Robert E. Lee, the leading general of the Confederacy, had learned the lessons of Napoleon very well. Lee understood the art of maneuver and the impact of strategical and tactical aggression. It was precisely what the South needed. In a prolonged war with the North, which consisted of more industrialized and prosperous states, the more agrarian South could not expect to win. The North could call on a population of 22 million, while the states of the South had just 5.5 million whites and 3.5 million slaves. A more cautionary voice would have recommended a defensive campaign, but Lee and the President of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, both of whom had been trained at West Point, knew that in similar circumstances Napoleon would have taken the offensive. Early victories could give the South political leverage far beyond its actual strength. It might also attract important support abroad, such as from Britain. In June 1862, Lee forced Union troops away from the Confederate capital, Richmond, by sending a cavalry force to threaten Washington, D.C. In September 1862, Lee crossed the River Potomac and invaded the North. His movements were frustrated by a Union army led by George B. McClellan, and Lee became trapped behind Antietam Creek. Despite this, Lee fought such an aggressive battle that he inflicted more casualties on his opponents and withdrew undefeated. On May 1863, Lee was outnumbered and outflanked at Chancellorsville, but he rejected the defensive battle in favor of attacking one flank after the other, thereby winning a brilliant victory. By now, Lee's troops believed he was a genius and felt they could not fail. Perhaps Lee even thought that himself. In summer 1863, Lee swept through the crumbled valley in order to strike Washington, D.C. from the north. However, his troops stumbled upon Union soldiers at Gettysburg, and Lee rapidly had to plan a battle. So what you have here is Robert E. Lee fighting aggressively using Napoleonic tactics of, what was it? The art of maneuver and the impact of strategical and tactical aggression. So an aggressive, aggressive maneuvers, especially to the flanks apparently. And even though outnumbered and forced into a bad position, through his aggression and tactics, he's able to win and secure victories to where they think he's unbeatable. But then, as he's going to attack Washington, D.C. from the north, he runs it into Gettysburg. At this time, battle by accident. At this time, as armies advanced through enemy territory, they would send out parties of troops to search for food and supplies. A.P. Hill, one of Lee's divisional commanders, heard that there was a good supply of shoes at the town of Gettysburg and sent his men off to gather them. As the Confederate soldiers wandered into the town on 1st of July, they were confronted with 2 brigades of Union cavalry who were on reconnaissance. Although heavily outnumbered, the Union forces were armed with repeating breech-loading carbines, and the superior fire kept the Confederates at bay. The news that a fight was developing at Gettysburg duly reached Lee, who decided to deploy his troops and bring the North to battle. With more and more Confederate troops flooding into Gettysburg.
Today's the first day of spring.
Yeah, first day of spring. The Union brigades fell back and took control of the high ground overlooking the town. It was a defensive move and encouraged Lee to think he had the advantage, that if he just kept the pressure of his attack, the Union forces would cave in. He was thinking in Napoleonic terms, but infantry firepower and artillery had evolved considerably during the intervening 50 years. Repeating rifles and more devastating artillery power meant that the tactical advantage had shifted from the offensive to the defensive. So, because of improved firepower, you didn't have to go attack, you could take a hill and defend. Troops were launched Troops who launched a daring charge could be annihilated before they reached the opposing line in sufficient numbers to break through. Lee did not fully appreciate this. Even after the lengthening casualty lists of the first years of the war, he continued to believe the efficacy of charismatic leadership. By the second day of battle, Major General George Meade had deployed his Union troops effectively along the high ground which ran from Culp's Hill on his right flank along Cemetery Ridge to center to Little Round Top on his left. The Union Army would not be drawn into an attack, and every hour Lee let pass, more and more Union troops arrived to reinforce the defensive position. Lee had lost any advantage of impetus he might have possessed in the first day, and was compelled to organize his troops opposite the Union positions, but on lower ground. Deciding he could wait no longer, Lee launched an assault in the late afternoon. Little Round Top. Lee aimed to envelop the Union left flank, sending Longstreet's First Corps against the weakly defended Little Round Top with the aim of then turning it on the center. A mighty artillery barrage began the greatest combat ever fought on American soil. A diversionary Confederate assault went up against Culp's Hill. The convex Union line of defense meant that it was easier to reinforce each of Meade's flanks, whereas communications were stretched along the concave Confederate lines. Longstreet's troops surged up the wooded slopes towards Little Round Top, where Colonel Joshua L. Chamberlain commanded the 20th Maine in the extreme edge of the Union left flank. So he's on the very end of the left flank, obviously. Line after line of Alabama troops launched themselves at the men from Maine, but the Union troops stood firm. A year before Gettysburg, Chamberlain had been professor of rhetoric and modern languages at Bowdoin College, where he had succeeded the husband of the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. He was a passionate supporter of the movement for the abolition of slavery, and this fervor fired his defense at Little Round Top. For over an hour, Chamberlain and his men resisted repeated Confederate assaults, but with more than one-third of his men casualties and ammunition running low, he had to face what looked like the final attack that would overwhelm them. Digging deep into his courage, he ordered bayonet. His men knew exactly what was required and fixed bayonets to their guns. Yelling fiercely, 200 survivors of the fight threw themselves down the hill and charged the Confederate forces. Having exhausted themselves with countless uphill assaults, the Alabama troops broke. Some surrendered, while others fell back. Little Round Top was saved and the Union flank was secure. Elsewhere, Confederate attacks were also beaten back. Lee had failed in his main objective. Pickett's charge. By the third day of the battle, neither side was willing to give way, period. Meade would not be triggered into going on the offensive, and this compelled Lee to once more consider the decisive assault that would leave his opponent reeling. This time he decided to break the Union Army in half by launching a massive attack at its center. It was a Napoleonic gesture, but in an age of modern firepower, Lee assembled some 15,000 troops for his major thrust, and although Major General George E. Pickett was only one of 3 divisional commanders leading the soldiers, his name would forever be associated with the attack. Announcing their intentions with a 2-hour artillery bombardment of Cemetery Ridge, Meade responded by shifting extra troops from both of his flanks to reinforce the center of his position. The main Confederate attack began in mid-afternoon as thousands of Lee's soldiers advanced through the wheat fields towards the Union lines in front of Cemetery Ridge. Now the enemy's guns have quieted down and our heads are poking above the breastwork all along the line, recalled Stephen Allen Osborne, a Union soldier in Meade's army. Then the cry is raised, "There they come!" It was a grand but awful sight to see those 3 lines sweeping forward at almost certain death. First, there is the report of one lone Union cannon up to our right, quickly followed by the most awful, unearthly roar of letting go of some 60 guns along our line. To the right of us, their line kept advancing, but opposite us we could see they were staggered and were giving ground, but rallied and came on. Meade had removed his artillery out of the way of the Confederate bombardment, but now rushed them forwards, so that they could rake the advancing Confederates with deadly volleys. Lee's troops showed incredible bravery, pressing on through the withering storm of fire. Confederate Brigadier General Lewis A. Armistead thrust his sword into his hat, held it high, and shouted, "Come on, boys, give them the cold steel. Who will follow me?" In an earlier age, a determined charge with bayonets might have cleared the Union lines, but now, as the surviving Confederates approached within range of Union muskets and rifles, they were ravaged by yet more firepower. Armistead walked on with his hat held high and reached the stone wall that formed part of the Union defenses, but around him there were only a few hundred men out of the 15,000 that had begun the advance. It was a slaughter, and Armistead himself was shot dead as he stood among the Union cannons. Meade immediately counterattacked and swept away the few troops that had penetrated his line. Those lucky to be alive returned to Lee, and he could do nothing but withdraw. Pickett's charge had been called the high water mark of the Confederacy because it represented the supreme bravery and daring of its troops and its commanders. But no army could withstand such a shock as this, and Lee's reputation suffered a severe blow. He had brought the Confederacy to the edge of destruction and was forced to fight a war of defensive maneuver ever afterwards, no longer able to challenge the North with bold advances. The days of the Confederacy were numbered, although the actual surrender was delayed until 1865. Gettysburg also represented the end of the Napoleonic approach to war and announced the beginning of modern industrialized warfare, with an escalation in firepower and consequently a need for strong entrenched defensive positions. Gettysburg was a particularly bloody battle. Union casualties for 3 days amounted to 3,155 killed, 14,529 wounded, and 5,365 missing. Confederate losses were 3,903 killed, 18,735 wounded, and 5,425 missing. In wars of previous eras, the bodies of the dead were usually left on the battlefield to be looted, then thrown into mass graves, but sacrifice on this scale for the unity of a nation and in service of political ideals was deemed worthy of far greater respect. President Abraham Lincoln visited the battlefield 4 months later and likened the fighting there with the political liberation of the nation. From these honored dead, Lincoln declared at his Gettysburg address, "We take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain." The battlefield was preserved as a national park, and the dead were buried in a cemetery. It marked the beginning of an age in which the lives of the nation's soldiers would be more highly valued. Well, I've been to Gettysburg, and it's pretty cool. You know, you look and you think, wow, all that death happened here so long ago. But, you know, there you go. And history is rife with examples of a superior force, like a greater numbers, like momentum and all that shifting, you know, due to like greater firepower. Sometimes it's like, you know, whatever it is, but take a look at like the 300, you know, at Thermopylae. There was 300 Spartans, and they held a choke point for I don't know how long. Everybody's seen the movie. They ended up dying, but they held out there for a long time. And what's it say? What's the saying? Like, go and tell each passerby that here the brave 300 lie. So, I guess what I'm trying to say, because I was going to make a video about current events, is I don't know. I wanted to liken it kind of to China, because everybody's scared of China. It's like, well, things can happen, you know. It's not written in stone. The future is unwritten, right? And you figure with Gettysburg, that was an accident. They didn't plan for that, right? Lee was going to attack D.C., and he sent people to get shoes from Gettysburg, because he heard there was shoes there. And that's where it all happened for him. It was an accident, something unplanned, you know. So that's why I don't worry, you know, like with China. They have more people, maybe more firepower, but I think we've got them on the science tip, because they're always stealing stuff from us. They need to steal our tech in order to stay abreast of technology. They take it from us. So hopefully, you know, if there was a conflict, that we could have some kind of superior firepower, some alien technology or something. But I'm going to start reading the battles out of this book to you guys, to give you an idea of, to give you a real look, you know, an idea of Not only what really happened, but what can happen. So, take it easy. It's the first day of spring, as my neighbor said. Bye. Have a good day.